Bienvenido a un video más del canal Marten Platero. Somos un canal diferente que te lleva las historias que te harán sentir el momento.
President Reagan decided to support the ruling junta here 9 months ago. More helicopters start to lift off out of the bush. Mounted on the side of the craft, their US-supplied M60 machine guns with which the army launches its surprise aerial bombardments. This is typical of what's happening throughout El Salvador today, with the army moving in on positions that the guerrillas captured during their offensive.
We have to look for a formula. We have struggled for one formula, and our formula is democracy.
The army commanders told us they'd killed over 300 guerrillas here, but we had only ever seen 50, the rest had been civilians. The note left with the bodies reads, "Don't come back because we know about your actions, and what has happened to these people will happen to you." 20 minutes to curfew time on the streets of San Salvador. The last people about scramble onto any open truck that stops. The army here waits for no excuses from people out after the curfew falls. They shoot first. A minister in the ruling junta races past, his bodyguards clenching their weapons. And in the gutter, El Salvador's poor eat anything from the day's rubbish. In these past months, more than a few beggars and drunks have been shot dead as they've staggered homeless through the curfew. By 10 past the curfew hour of 7 p.m, the streets are deserted and the army starts its rounds. Every night, at least 15 people are shot dead in San Salvador alone. Dawn reveals the night's killings. This man shot in the head, his identity papers gone from his back pocket, and his boots stripped from his feet. The army's sign to others that they did it. Passers-by are beginning to accept it as almost normal here. More than 1,200 people died in El Salvador in January, and beyond the indiscriminate killings of drunks, suspected opponents of the ruling junta like this victim are simply executed at the roadside. The leftists and the guerrillas they support reply with firebomb attacks like this one, belching black smoke from beneath a bridge. Troops are forced to divert to check what's happening. But the real war is going on beyond the smoke and the city, out in the countryside, large portions of which the guerrillas control. Caught in the crossfire are the refugees, here roughly housed in what was once the Archbishop of San Salvador's garden. Here alone, 1,200 women and children have come to seek refuge from the civil war outside. Some of their fathers and husbands are fighting or have died for the guerrillas. All are desperately poor, and it is they about whom the war is being fought. Age-old discontent that left the country's wealth in the hands of perhaps 200 people has exploded into a civil war in whose outcome both superpowers now have an interest. A makeshift hammock brings slender relief to a 3-month-old baby. The front of the Archbishop's house was blasted by a bomb soon after he allowed the refugees to take cover here 9 months ago. The attacks have continued ever since, to the point where he and his staff have evacuated, taking paintings and ornaments with them. Churches throughout El Salvador's capital city are havens of forgotten refugees. In every backyard, on every doorstep, fatherless families huddle together. The church ensures food gets through, but cannot ensure protection. And even as these children watch from another church staircase, the priests who offered them sanctuary have had to flee the death squads and take refuge themselves in other countries. It is amid this chaos that America is moving. On Sunday, a new chargé d'affaires took up his residence here. The Salvadorian police movements outside bear witness that he is no ordinary envoy. For the new man here is the top political advisor to the US Defense Department on Latin America. Far too senior to be an ambassador, he's here to advise President Reagan on whether he should commit American troops to a civil war in which the guerrillas are already strongly grouped, and who in any such event might call in supporters from sympathizing governments elsewhere, including Cuba. So secretive are the Americans about what they're doing here that the new chargé was literally smuggled in unannounced, and has refused so far to be photographed beyond the usual passing moment in his bulletproof, blast-proof Cadillac. 200 yards away at the El Presidente Hotel, further mystery surrounds a number of American military advisors who are currently living here and working with the Salvadorian army. The American embassy admits to 20, but other American sources put it at 80, about the number stationed in Vietnam before the direct American involvement in the war there.
American-supplied military equipment is also coming in here at some pace. 6 Army helicopters this week alone. Under cover of the nightly curfew, the drone of heavy transport planes can be heard coming into the city's airport. People here are under the firm impression that they too are bringing in heavy armaments, together with an indication that President Reagan has every intention of continuing to support the ruling junta, irrespective of what the daily death toll brings. Jon Snow, News at 10, San Salvador.
A Salvadorian ambulance speeds through the dawn sunlight to yet another emergency. No one is sure what, but after 14 months of violence here, doctors and nurses are prepared for anything. Running in their special yellow uniforms, the first aid team is deliberately eye-catching in the hope that neither left nor right will shoot at them. This time it's leftists who firebombed a number of buses on the outskirts of San Salvador. The army is here already, anxious lest they themselves may now be the target. A menacing and unpleasant atmosphere prevails as they try to determine what has happened. As attempts to clear the buses continued, the troops prepared for the regular sweep of the countryside in pursuit of the guerrillas. It is in the course of these daily hunts that many innocent people get caught in the crossfire.
In the end, it's a typical day-to-day occurrence in El Salvador. In fact, only 2 children were burnt. Normally, many more actually die. But it is the kind of occurrence which is leading to greater and greater instability in El Salvador.
Out in the country, roads like this one are no longer safe to drive along. Just before last night's curfew, a bus carrying 15 passengers was attacked. Every single one was killed. The government blames the leftists. But when we entered the town of Suchitoto, from which all the dead came, there was confusion about what had really happened. As soldiers casually patrolled the streets, all that was certain was that among the dead had been 2 8-year-old children. Violent death in this town is no stranger, and at a chapel in a side street, a mother and child stood almost expressionless beside the coffin in which their husband and father lay dead. In the next street, relatives were already bearing another coffin to its grave. In the open air, they gave vent to their grief and seemed to emphasize that they were all victims of something over which they had no control. In the graveyard, the coffin was simply to be consigned the way more than 10,000 others have gone in this past year. Indeed, human rights organizations now believe the figure may be nearer 20,000. But that fact gave no comfort to this family in its loss. At 3 p.m., the church bells tolled for the mass burial of the rest. Coffins arrived from every direction. They lay lined up in front of the church doors. So far from the guerrilla strongholds in the hills beyond these people's homes. In all the killing, more than half the victims have been peasants. Far fewer have been from the armed forces on either side in this civil war. Over 400 townsfolk have died in this place alone, but it took this week to bring the deaths of as many as 15 in one incident.
6 hours in a Salvadorian day have then shown us in a macabre way what is happening every day in this country. Some 50 people a day are dying in acts of violence across the country. To the outside world, these coffins are now statistics in a catalogue of violent death that is probably worse than anywhere else in the world today. Yet beyond the weapons that both superpowers are allowing to reach both sides, no one is doing much to curb it. Jon Snow, News at 10, Suchitoto, El Salvador. Just after dawn, leftist guerrillas who control much of the countryside here attacked a beer lorry out on the open road, a typical economic target designed to disrupt supplies.
But a mile down the same road, rightists had attacked and horribly mutilated 3 men from the nearby town. People in passing buses simply stared and accepted it.
And this is what the note left with the bodies reads: "Don't come back because we know about your actions, and what has happened to these people will happen to you." And it's signed EMN, which is an extreme right-wing paramilitary group. This kind of butchery, which is generally the activity of those on the right wing in this country, is the sort of thing which can be found on any roadside throughout El Salvador at this time.
6 hours later, a policeman lay dead in a pool of blood in the capital's main shopping precinct. But if these killings typify the day-to-day violence in El Salvador, events at the country's central police station exemplify the government's role in it. 21 university academics had been arrested and dragged from their meeting place. Over 100 police had been involved in the raid. Tanks and armoured cars had been used too. These people had been holding their regular weekly curriculum meeting. They've held it at the same time in the same way for years. But today the government says it was a subversive meeting. Almost certainly, due to pressure from international opinion, 13 of the academics are to be released. In the past, many have simply disappeared in this way, only to be found dumped dead in the city sometime later. But these 8 lecturers are to be held. The law here has just been changed to allow them to be detained without trial for up to 6 months. This man is the rector of the university and is thus regarded as a dangerous intellectual. Amnesty International knows of at least 25 others like him who went missing in January alone. Below, in the yard of the police station, heavily armed police return from making their rounds. There are countless instances of deaths and disappearances in which they have been found to have played a role. Yet they are armed with NATO weaponry, which the United States is continuing to supply. This headquarters itself is widely known to have been used to torture victims. Yet, despite the evidence, little pressure appears to be being used on the authorities here to end the day-to-day violations of human rights. Jon Snow, News at 10, San Salvador. The poor in El Salvador are very poor, the majority housed in shanty towns like this one in the heart of the capital. 70% of the children under 5 suffer from malnutrition, 1 in 10 dies at birth, and mothers give birth to an average of 6 children each. Hence, El Salvador has the highest population density in Latin America, a population which has been ruthlessly exploited for more than a century by a tiny handful of very rich families. They live up the hill 2 miles from the shanty towns in palatial residences, walled and barred from the civil war which is tearing the rest of the country apart. Until 18 months ago, about 30 families here controlled 60% of the land. Rolling farmland like this at La Lavora, near the Guatemalan border. A farm of 3,000 acres, it produced coffee, rice and sugar. But although the owner, a 75-year-old millionaire, still lives beyond the bougainvillea in the heart of the farm, it now belongs to his workers. The junta that took over recognized that if poverty was to be undermined here, the land upon which they worked would have to be redistributed to spread the country's wealth more evenly. Agrarian reform had been the battle cry of the left, and suddenly, under Senor Cordoba, the junta's Minister of Agriculture, these women and their families were granted membership of farming cooperatives, and for a moment it appeared that the steam had been taken out of the guerrilla war. Classrooms opened up for the children who had previously gone without education. 40% of the people in El Salvador can neither read nor write. This cooperative is now rich enough to employ 2 teachers, and the state matches with 2 others. These children and the cooperative they live in are, though, only a model. For despite the tranquility here, 50 miles away in San Salvador, the architect of their prosperity, Senor Cordoba, was gunned down by rightists 4 months ago. His death deprived the junta of most of its moderate support, no one carried his work on, corruption destroyed most of his projects, and many of the old owners managed to repossess their farms. Probably thanks to the owner here, this project lives on. This place shows that peace and prosperity are possible in El Salvador today, but by assassinating the man who devised these cooperatives, thereby bringing about the departure from the ruling junta of the people who believed in agrarian reform and were prepared to put it into action, the rightists have handed to the guerrillas on the left the very cause which gives credence to their war. Jon Snow, News at 10, La Lavora, El Salvador. 15-year-old guerrillas guard the entry into San Lorenzo. The rebels have held this town for 3 months now. In the wake of repeated attempts by the army to regain the place, most of the civilian population has fled. Of 50 or more guerrillas who hold the town, only a handful are older than their teens. The older men are deployed on the continuing offensive elsewhere in the country. A few train in a side street. President Reagan has charged that they are being supplied with weapons by Russia and Cuba. His administration explains the fact that these guerrillas have American weaponry by saying that it comes from old American stockpiles in Vietnam and Ethiopia. In reality, these weapons have been bought with money raised from kidnap ransoms, and most predate anything left in Vietnam. The Soviets certainly favor the leftists here, but how much tangible support they give is questionable. And behind America's accusation of Russian involvement in arms supplies is a major embarrassment in their own supply policy.
US military supplies to the junta's army against whom these people are fighting were suspended after the brutal murder last December of 4 American nuns. The Salvadorian judge appointed to look into the case was killed himself on the day his report was due to come out. That report heavily implicated the military in those deaths.
A brand new Hughes helicopter, which we filmed secretly in the square of an army-held town called Guerra, underlines Mr. Reagan's decision to ignore the deaths of the nuns and resume supplies. More weapons are arriving daily for the very army units that were manning the roadblock at which the sisters disappeared. Although the judge's report was never published, reliable sources are adamant that he had evidence that Salvadorian army men raped and shot the nuns in cold blood. 100 yards from this command post, a team of British and Irish missionaries talked to us near their church. Father Gerard is one of 2 Irish priests here, Sister Anselm one of 2 Welsh-born nuns.
I think a very important thing for a lot of people would be to try and acquaint themselves with the problems here of the country and the issues at stake, and try to see in what way they can help by raising their voices as well against the situation that is happening here and the number of people that are being killed, and see what's possible to do at that level.
They are the last missionaries left in this part of the country. America's decision to ignore the murder of their colleagues has left them still more vulnerable. But they are determined to stay, and in doing so, Father Gerard believes that there is something people outside El Salvador can do to help. Jon Snow, News at 10, Guerra in El Salvador.
The injustice causes are there. There's no question there is misery in this country. And there is misery in all Latin America. There's no question about that. We have to look for a formula to solve it. Now, we have struggled for one formula, and our formula is democracy. Our formula is that the willing of the people will solve the problem. But there is people from the extreme left who do not believe on this. They believe on destroying all the institutions and everything to take power. Give us time. Give us the chance to make this country survive, to make this country convert the country from a dictatorship, from totalitarianism, from abuses of authority, back to democracy without the concept of Marxism, without giving the people the loss of their will. Let them use their will to make their final decision. And I'm sure that the final decision will be democracy, it will be liberty, it will be justice, like the England people will believe, and the European people believes, and the American people believes.
guy here made the first evacuation because there was a lot of kills down there.
Esta con una cachucha.
Eight in the morning in San Salvador, men clearing the debris from a routine guerrilla bomb that has blasted the city's water department offices. Bombs in the capital are still commonplace. A mile away in the city's suburbs, troops and police on a search and destroy mission after a tip-off that a guerrilla safe house exists in the district. Two incidents that underline the pattern the civil war is now pursuing here. The guerrillas being forced out of the urban areas, but still able to come in and bomb economic targets. But out in the country, it all changes. No road is safe. Two guerrillas armed with pistols hold up journalist colleagues on an open main road. And on every road, the persistent doubts as to who controls it. The last time we went down this one, waving our white flag, the guerrillas were in firm control. But today, with the sudden appearance of truckloads of army troops and the sound of distant gunfire, things were different. We had moved in ahead and linked up with an advanced troop that was pounding the little town of San Lorenzo beyond with gunfire. Last week, we'd found 30 guerrillas here in control, with perhaps as many civilians. Now the troops were systematically burning the guerrilla cover around the area.
This is typical of what's happening throughout El Salvador today, with the army moving in on positions that the guerrillas captured during their offensive. How long they can hold them, that's really what's in question.
After a period of hours, the soldiers had surrounded the town and moved into buildings on the outskirts. At every point, the gunfire was heavy, and the guerrillas started by putting up a spirited resistance. Soldiers ducked and dodged as shots bounced across the street. On the other side of the houses, other soldiers ferreted about, picking off snipers across the valley. But after an hour, the center of the town appeared securely in army hands. Secure enough for a jeep load to roar off to reconnoiter. Few of the guerrillas appeared either to have been hit or captured, and as the bullets flew about, there was a distinct impression that they'd merely withdrawn to the hills to fight another day.
Jon Snow, News at 10, San Lorenzo, El Salvador.
Fresh troops moved down the main street of San Lorenzo. The army took the town during last week, but now the place has become the marshalling point for troops engaged in what seems to be the biggest military counteroffensive since guerrillas launched their own abortive final offensive 6 weeks ago. For the most part, the army's successes appear to have stemmed from America's substantial shipment of ammunition and weapons to the government, and to the fact that the guerrillas themselves never got the ammunition they expected from outside. Even now, America says hundreds of tons of Soviet and Cuban-financed supplies are waiting in Nicaragua for a further spring offensive. A helicopter hovers with an army commander directing the artillery. The Americans say at least 25 more of these machines and a great deal else will have to be supplied if the guerrillas are to be beaten. 150 American military personnel and several hundred American civilians will also be needed in support. Newly supplied American 150mm guns, well hidden in the vegetation, are already playing a decisive role for the military. And right across the area, fire and smoke mark the trail of army successes. Observers here say that against this, the coming days will show just how much of a force El Salvador's guerrilla movement really is. Jon Snow, ITN, near San Lorenzo.
What is certain from one patrol with the Salvadorian Navy is this, that should outside forces wish to supply the guerrillas with large quantities of arms by sea, then they probably wouldn't have much of a problem.
Four days into the Army's offensive, fresh troops assembled to reinforce the 2,000 already deployed further north. Their US-supplied NATO-type rifles, a tangible sign of the transformation in the armed forces since President Reagan decided to support the ruling junta here 9 months ago. New helmets, new uniforms, new training, all a result of American cash, have resulted in a determined new turnout. The 105mm howitzers airlifted here last February have already been shelling the villages in which the army claims the guerrillas are holding out. Helicopters, too, have been playing a crucial role in targeting the guns on the concentrations of people on the ground. Any human movement below is regarded as enemy movement, whether by guerrillas or unarmed peasants. Shortages have forced the age for recruitment of these soldiers down to 15. The troops have been told that not only are they fighting the guerrillas, but that there are hundreds of Cubans, Russians, and even Chinese ranged against them. The spearhead of the operation is the new Atlacatl Brigade, a quick response unit trained by the American Green Berets. We lifted off in one of the newly supplied American Bell Huey helicopters to be taken forward to see for ourselves the results of the Army's action. Mounted on the side of the craft, the M60 machine guns with which the Army launches its surprise aerial bombardments.
It wasn't until we were on board this helicopter, looking down over the ground over which it was travelling, that we realised we were looking at the very territory over which we had walked with the guerrillas only 10 days before.
Over the pilot's shoulders we glimpsed the Lempa River, which we had previously crossed with the guerrillas on a makeshift raft. On the ground, the Army led us an hour's walk through to where they claimed 300 heavily armed guerrillas had been encamped. Suddenly, we reached a clearing beneath a huge mango tree, where troops were gathered in a spot which we recognized from our clandestine trip with the guerrillas 10 days earlier. Then, there had been women and children, several hundred gathered around the spot, a red flag in the tree itself, and a handful of guerrillas providing security. Now flames engulfed the homes that we had filmed them in. Buildings were smashed, timbers smouldered, the clay bricks had crumbled. The roof under which we had slept 3 nights had been bombed and strafed. The livestock upon which the peasants depended was dead, and of the dozens of children we'd lived with, no sign. The army commanders, to whom we could not admit our knowledge of what had been before, told us they'd killed over 300 guerrillas here, but we had only ever seen 50, the rest had been civilians. Now helicopters scoured the valleys in search of those who might have fled on foot. The guerrillas were later to report that they managed to get many of the people out before the army's attack. It is during these sweeps that aid workers have alleged the massacres of civilians occur as they bunch together trying to cross the rivers. The offensive over, the army relaxes, cooking chicken in their American-issued helmets. Nearby, 2 captured kittens. The colonel has dubbed them Carter and Reagan. He prefers Reagan. He's proved a better friend, he says. More helicopters start to lift off out of the bush with the first load of returning troops. A few units are left in strategic positions, but even they will only stay a few days. The guerrillas invariably return and the whole cycle begins again. This is the nature of the war in El Salvador. The Atlacatl Brigade begins its journey back to base triumphant, but only a relocation of the ever-flexible front line has been achieved. The real victims, the peasants, who refuse to abandon either their homes or the guerrillas who they believe best defend their hopes. Jon Snow, News at 10, El Salvador.
Somos un canal diferente que te lleva las historias que te harán sentir el momento.